Well, welcome back, everybody. It's Passage to Profit again with Richard and Elizabeth Gearhart. So happy to be here, and thank you for listening. Our guest this evening is Debra Boblitt, and she's a motivational speaker, and it was always her dream to make a positive impact on the lives of others. And Debra was a top leader at State Farm Insurance Company, and she decided to head out on her own. So welcome, Debra. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
What was it like to move from a corporate environment to running your own gig?
Yes, very, very different, as you can imagine, right? And I officially retired in order to do that. And I have been doing it for the last couple years, but it's great. You're out on your own and you speak to others and you help them based on your experience and your expertise. And so it's been very gratifying, actually.
That's great. That's great. So what prompted you to decide to do this? What was your motivation and inspiration?
Yes, well, it's been interesting because I was an entrepreneur myself for several years, and then I was in leadership for 24 years, some type of a leadership executive position. And what happened during that period of time was I was always being asked to do exactly what I do now. So would you please come and speak to this group? Would you do this? Would you do that on this topic, on that topic, primarily around leadership and entrepreneurship? And so when I retired, I knew that that was my goal, is to be able to share that and to help people and to continue to help people understand what it is to be an entrepreneur. What are the tips for being an entrepreneur? What are the frustrations, et cetera? And then also, how do you lead a team? Because as an entrepreneur, you are a leader. And so how do you lead your team? How do you create a successful team? How do you communicate, et cetera, et cetera? So that's really what prompted me to do that, because I was doing that anyway, internally and then also externally while I had the position in leadership with State Farm.
So what do you think the most important qualities a leader needs to have, and especially an entrepreneur leader needs to have?
Yeah, so if we narrow it down to an entrepreneur leader, I would say, first of all, there's got to be passion in there somewhere. You've got to be passionate about whatever you're doing. So if you're selling widgets or you're selling some non-consumable product, you've got to really care about that. You've also got to have perseverance. And particularly in today's environment, as we just saw through the pandemic, you're going to have highs and lows at all times based on the market and what's happening out there. So the perseverance piece is critical. It's got to be, I'm not going to give up until I'm successful. And that's really what it takes to be an entrepreneur and a successful entrepreneur. That's critical. The other piece that I think is very important, and I have been talking to a lot of business owners lately, small business owners particularly, and it's this issue of staff. That's always been the number one problem for every single business owner I've ever talked to over a 30-year period of time. And it's even more so today because it's difficult to get people. But it's not only difficult to get them, but then how do you continue to incent them? How do you develop them? How do you keep them staying in your business as opposed to the competition or going somewhere else? So that's critical as well. And so those three pieces are probably the most important. And then I guess I would add one more thing. When you open any kind of a business, whether it's online or in person, and you have an actual physical location, it's no longer about customer service. It's about the customer's experience. And there's a huge difference between the two. And you've got to have a plan and a way that you're going to provide the best customer experience, or that customer, that client's going somewhere else. And I've done that myself. If I don't feel like I've got the best customer experience at X, wherever that is, I'll just find the other one because there's competition everywhere. So those are critical pieces to being a successful entrepreneur.
That's great. And I just want to say that the bar for customer experience keeps raising.
Absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
Consider your typical retail experience versus Amazon.
Right.
Now the expectation is that you've got 8 billion things to choose from. Mm-hmm. You've got all sorts of reviews to read about whether it works or not, how good it is, what the pluses, the minuses are.
Once you get it immediately.
Right? Yeah. What's that?
It's immediate. With Prime, you get it either the same day or the next day, right?
Right. And then it gets delivered to your door almost instantly. And it's so reliable. And so that's like the standard, I think, everybody expects for every kind of retail transaction, every type of commercial transaction.
Right. Well, that's why
And
it's so,
so,
yeah.
and
It's
if they don't do that, they're not satisfied.
exactly. And really, you've got to train, if you have staff, you have to train your staff to be able to accommodate for that in some way. So business owners today have to be more and more and more creative. They have to be, because their competition is Amazon. That's on everybody's mind. I didn't get it in the mail today when I ordered it this morning. So what are you going to do for me? So
Right.
I think every entrepreneur has to think very carefully about that, and how do they create the customer experience that's going to keep me there as their customer, because competition is huge, and the expectations of all of us, including myself, are much higher than they ever were before, because we can get
Yeah.
it somewhere else.
Yeah. How important do you think the website is? Because we're actually working on ours now, and it's all about the customer journey through your website. Uh, do you think every business needs a website in this day and age? And do you think it has to stand out?
Yes, and yes. I think it's very, very important. I was talking to a business owner the other day, young woman, who, by the way, opened her doors during COVID, which is pretty incredible. And they had a successful year. And they have gotten so large in 1 year, during COVID, no less, that they're now going to be expanding. And so I said to her, I said, tell me about this. And where are you getting your customers? A, B, where are you going to get your new staff? And she said they have Instagram up, and only Instagram. They don't really use anything anymore. That is how they are getting customers walking in the door every single day. And that's how they believe they're going to get their newest employees as they expand. So, they're relying on that. Of course, word of mouth still counts in this day and age. Referral and word of mouth is still critically important. But that's really what they're relying on. If they didn't have that, they probably would not be expanding. So I agree. I think yes and yes to those questions. They're going to have a website, and does play a critical role.
But it's interesting to know that you can start without a website, which, 5 years ago would have been a shocking idea.
Yeah.
Yes,
Everybody would have said, well, you got to have a website,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Kenya, do you have any thoughts?
I
Yes.
do. Deborah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial rut and what you can share in terms of how to avoid getting into one and how to get out of one if you're already in one.
Yes, and I would say, we used to say in our business, hope is not a strategy. So, right? Gee, I hope I'm successful this year. I hope I get clients or whatever. So I still think, Kenya, that you've got to have a plan. You have to have a solid business plan that you run by others, and that it's a practical business plan. And then don't forget about it. I've had so many entrepreneurs who develop the most incredible plan. It looks wonderful, and then they don't follow it. And so that's how ruts happen. When you let that go and you don't go back to what am I supposed to be doing on a daily basis? In my opinion, it gets that granular. What do I do every day to make sure this business is a success? And all of that needs to be in your plan. And then your employees absolutely have to buy into that plan and understand it and then act on it, or nothing's going to happen. And you're right. That's when the ruts come in.
So, Deborah, do you ever, when you're talking about this subject with your clients or with your audiences, do you ever talk about Plan B?
Yes, because
as a way to also kind of, counter those ruts?
Yes, and I also think that flexibility, and we've been talking about this generally right now, but flexibility is key. So, for example, one more time, when the markets change, you have to be flexible enough to turn and change on a dime. And so COVID is the perfect example. This whole pandemic threw all of these small business owners just out on the street, basically, right? Now, what do I do? I'm closed for 4 months at least, or more in some states, as we know, right? Now, what do I do? And so many of them changed literally what they sold, or how they approached clients, or how they reached clients, or changed their website. I mean, it takes creativity and flexibility, and that is key. So I'll give you an example, being in the insurance industry. So in California, I had a lot of agents out there in California at one time, and that marketplace changes constantly, particularly as it related to insurance. Well, our business owners could sell one day, the next day they couldn't because of legislative issues, et cetera, right? And regulations. Today you can, tomorrow you can't. So you've got to have a plan B there. So if this happens, this is what I'll do. It is so critical. And I think last year was probably the best example for any business owner to know, I better have a plan B.
Well, that's interesting. I agree with you 100%. And I talked to a lot of business owners for my startup business that I started right before COVID. It's an interview. I'll talk about it later. But at the beginning of COVID and quarantine, I talked to people and they were scared. And then 6 months later, I talked to people and they had figured it all out. It was truly amazing. Like people that made their money giving presentations in front of live audiences, figured it out.
Exactly.
It was amazing. But I guess, how do you motivate people would be my question, because you're a motivational speaker and I've seen motivational speakers and I come out of there, I'm like, wow. So what do you think is important about motivating people?
Well, I think it's getting to their target area. It's getting to their passion. So I think everybody, entrepreneurs and anybody, especially people, of course, in leadership, have to be passionate about something, but you have to figure out what that is in your life. And then once you figure that out, there's all kinds of ways that you can go from there, from building a business to, kind of doing something completely different with that passion. But it's re-energizing. It's going back to what that passion was. And another example, we'd have agents who'd been in the business for 20 years. And all of a sudden, that motivation was gone. And so one of the best ways to re-energize them is to go back to this question, a very basic question. Why did you want to own your own business in the first place? What'd you want? And so if you go back to that passion, that basic feeling of this is what I want to do, and here's why, that's the best way to remotivate yourself and to motivate others. And re-energize your staff as well, by the way.
That's excellent advice. Kenya, do you have another comment or question?
No, I think that was a great question, Elizabeth. I think what would be helpful, I think for me and everybody is what are some ways to stay motivated, as an entrepreneur? Because I know there can be a lot of discouraging moments along the road. So I just was hoping you could share a few ways to stay motivated outside of, maybe hearing you speak.
Sure. And I would probably recommend one thing in particular, many others as well, of course, but create a net of individuals around you. And so it doesn't necessarily mean all those people are in your own industry, but if you have a net, which I did too, as an entrepreneur and, by the way, as an executive. So I had a net of about 10 people around, and they weren't always the same. They would change depending on what stage of my career I was in. But for entrepreneurs, get that net of individuals who are positive, because you're always influenced by both negative and positive people. Surround yourself with a net of individuals who are positive and they motivate you. Therefore, you have some issues, you're in a rut, like you mentioned earlier, whatever that might be, you know who you can call, and those people are there to surround you with ideas, encouragement, concepts you haven't tried yet, all those kinds of things. And to me, that's critically important as a new entrepreneur all the way through your career. It does not matter if you're 20 years in. Surround yourself with the right people who are positive, because we all get in those down moments and think, I'm getting out of here. This just isn't working and I've had it. And you need those other people around you to do that. The other thing is, of course, obviously there's a lot of motivational kinds of messages that you can hear now online. Whatever your issue is, you can Google it. You get in there, and like for me, my example of what I do, www.debrabobblitt.com. And so I've got 3 different kind of talks that I do, particularly for leadership, but entrepreneurs, as you mentioned, are leaders. And so I talk about, when do you use this? When do you use grace? When do you use grit? Right? How do you lead a team successfully, et cetera, et cetera? How do you communicate? How do you get that message out? And so, find the people that motivate you and go there immediately. But I still think the best is get that net of people around you that you can call at any time. And that really can change the trajectory of your career.
No, that's great advice. I personally, I sometimes feel like having a business coach can make a big difference too. And also surrounding myself, like you suggest, with other business owners, because it's really important to be able to share some of the challenges. And if you say, look at, my accounts receivable is falling behind, the other person might say, yeah, I know what you mean. That really stinks, but this is what I've done to kind of address this. Or you should consider this vendor who's like really good at this.
Yes.
And it can open new pathways for you and new ideas.
Yes,
So,
I have a woman that I'm coaching actually in Sweden. She's an entrepreneur in Sweden, and I was part of a launch team for an organization in Sweden called Stronger Together. And she's one of those entrepreneurs. And so this is a conversation we've had many times. And the other thing I would recommend is similar to what you were just saying is find those people with either in your industry or your company, if it's a corporate kind of environment or whatever, who are getting it done, and attach yourself to those people. Have a regular monthly call with them. And in my own industry and company at the time, we had top producers, about the 1 to 5% of the entire company. We had over 70,000 employees and over 18,000 agents. And so our top level would have incredible ideas because why? They were cutting it. They were making the most money. They had the most staff. They were enjoying life. And so my recommendation to all of our agents was attach yourself to 1 or 2 of those people. You can't use all the ideas because they're not appropriate for your business necessarily, but you sure can take 1 of those ideas and you can have that phone call to encourage you. So to your point, somebody who's got expertise in the same area is very, very helpful and encouraging.
Well, that's excellent advice. I could listen to you all day. I'd love to hear one of your motivational speeches, but we're out of time for this segment, unfortunately.
Yes, and so we'll be right back with more Passage to Profit. Thank you so much, Debra, and I hope you'll stick around to help us with the rest of the show. So
I will. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Sure. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.